If there's one man who can help, if there's one man who can help, it's the man coming in here right now.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the 2003 FMA episode fan guide. Today we're going to be talking about episode 18, Marcoh's Notes. In this episode, the Elric brothers are trying to actually find Marcoh's notes, as the title suggests. However, the library recently burned down because Scar was actually getting into a fight with Gluttony and Lust, who are also investigating to find out more about Marcoh's notes. And in that fight, Scar realizes that they are in fact homunculi. Meanwhile, Ed and Al are assigned 2 new bodyguards, including Lieutenant Maria Ross, to protect them. However, she is actually kind of annoyed by the fact that Ed seems very resistant to their protection, and even though later on she insists to Hughes that they really should focus on protecting them, he explains that the Elric brothers are pretty much just going to do what they plan to do, and really it's just their job to try to help them best they can. So, he essentially understands that they're the protagonists of this series. After a couple failed attempts to actually try to find the notes and recreate them, they actually come across this woman, Sheska, who they met before, who it turns out has a photographic memory of everything within the library because she's read so much. She's a huge book fan. And she says that she can recreate all the notes for them. She does, but it turns out that Dr. Marcoh apparently made a cookbook. Ed eventually realizes rather quickly that the book is actually encoded, so it's not really a cookbook, it's just all hiding the particular formulas for the Philosopher's Stone within these notes, which makes sense because he was trying to keep things secret, obviously. Scar survives his injuries and is actually hiding out in a little encampment with some other Ishbalans, though he says he cannot stay because he doesn't really feel like he is worthy of staying with his people. And the episode kind of leaves off with Edward discovering the secret of the Philosopher's Stone, which is live human beings. My overall feelings for this one, it's a good episode. It's solid. It's really just kind of really getting out plot elements, steadily plodding along, so to speak. But there's also a lot of good humor and a lot of good character moments, particularly with Lieutenant Ross. It's just kind of interesting. She has this protective personality over the Elric brothers, but she's trying to kind of balance that with her duty as technically an officer who's kind of beneath them. Her little interactions with Hughes are very interesting. It's those little human moments that I think make Fullmetal Alchemist really stand out, because even with such a big cast, even these relatively minor characters feel somewhat fleshed out, or at the very least, well-rounded and believable. My favorite Fullmetal moment actually comes from Sheska as another example of another good character moment, because, well, there's sort of 2 with her, because when they're trying to look for her, they go to her home and she's actually being almost buried alive by her own book collection, which is, of course, ridiculously large. And there's a really good contrast where she's saying she was scouring all these books, and there's this little panel which shows like what's actually going on. It's just her kind of filing through books, and she's, of course, in her imagination is scaling almost these giant mountains. So there's a fun contrast there, which I thought is a good example of the FMA humor. And I also like how her little arc sort of resolves there, where Al basically says, hey, you have a gift and it's good that you're passionate about something you can actually help, and turns out she can recreate the notes. The fights with Scar are pretty good in the library with Gluttony and Lust, although I think they are pretty quick. Kind of almost wish they were a little longer, but even just the fact that it turns out that we've seen that Scar is such a powerful force thus far, he actually is having trouble with the homunculi because as he does ridiculous damage to Gluttony, blowing off his hand and actually blowing a hole through his head, it doesn't really faze him too much. Really kind of shows how really threatening the homunculi are, just in terms of their design, with the cascade of fire around them. They're just really enjoyable villains, and I think that even just in these earlier episodes, it really kind of goes to show how much of an influence they had, because I think all these years later, they're still one of the favorite elements of the show for a lot of people. I think for this one, I would probably give it about a 6. It's a pretty good episode. I think a lot of stuff kind of occurs that kind of needs to happen. It just feels like a very plot-heavy episode, where there's also a lot of good humor sprinkled throughout and little character moments. So I think it's pretty good. Alright everybody, those are my thoughts on this particular episode. If you have any comments or questions about it, anything I may have missed that you'd like to share, please let me know. You can expect these episodes typically on Fridays by 9 p.m., though there might be some little breaks here and there. Alright everybody, thank you for listening and stay magical.